Hi, today I want to take a look at Google Forms. Google Forms is this super powerful tool that you have and that you can use in your classroom. It's a great way to collect data from your students or from, for different activities that you might be doing. It's a great way to collect a lot of really useful information. It's a great way to create assessments for your students so that you can really quickly check progress, or you can create a lot of assessment data that you can use to mine and to see how your students are progressing. And it's a great way to organize information, to gather information in one place, and then to put it in a format that you can really use some of the organizational tools that you have access to. So I love Google Forms. I use Forms in all my classes all of the time in many different formats. So what I want to do is I want to walk you through the process today of creating Google Forms. And then as we go through, just talk a little bit about how you might be able to use those. So the first thing to do is to create the Google Form. So within your Google Drive, over here where it says new, you click on that. And it is not one of the top three, unfortunately. It's here under the more, but it's the first one under the more. So you just click over here. It is the purple icon. And depending on your share settings, it might ask you, do you want to share it to the same people or whatever, depending on where you're starting at. But this is your basic screen that you get right here. And this is where it pops up. So we have right up here your name, what you would like to call this, okay? So I'm going to call this class, let's call it, what do you want to call it? Survey, right? Class survey. Okay, and then under here, I can put in a description. So I want to capture data about my students. Okay. Now, that is an optional field. You do have to give it a title. This is an optional field, but here you could put like text from, like you want your students to read something first, so you could copy and paste it into that area right there. Maybe it's the instructions. If this is like an assessment or a test, it gives them the instructions of how to do things or whatever. Okay. Now up here, you notice that the title is still untitled, right? But if I click on it, it will capture whatever I call it here. Now, I don't have to call it the same thing. And a lot of times I won't. Like here, I might put, daily learning check, July 8th, 2020. But up here, I might put, DLC 720, 7820 or something. I might change it up here. This is for me. The students will see that, that file name, but this is what will appear up here at the top. And I think this is a lot more useful piece for them. Okay. So you can name it, either way you want. Obviously, just like all the other Google tools, here you can organize it. So let's say you go into Google Drive and you select, create this form. Oh, I forgot to put that in my English 10 folder or my Block 6 folder or whatever. This is where you can organize and do that as well. Okay, but that's the starting point of what you get right there. And then they've already given you the first question that you can start with. Again, it does give you this starting point, but you can determine how the questions or what kinds of questions you want to ask. Right here where it allows you to change the type. So up here, maybe it's a short answer question, okay? So what is your favorite and question mark. And then the students would come in and they would type their answer right here. Maybe I want them to write more. What is your favorite pet and why? Explain your favorite moment, or explain how you know that this is your favorite animal. Whatever it might be. If I want them to write longer, I'm going to put this select paragraph, okay? Now, this will allow the students more space to type. Now, I will warn you that it is a little clunky inside of this. The kids don't get to tab, at the beginning of paragraphs or whatever. So you do have to kind of think about it in that way. But you would just type your question here, and then you select your type of question that you want. Over here under the three dots, I get this option here, show description, which a lot of times I would like to use. So like, let's say this is the question. What is your favorite pet? Pick your favorite pet and why, and explain why. And this is a nice little place that you can give some additional information, to the students so that they know exactly what you're looking for or how you want them to do something, right? Okay. Some of the other types of questions that we have here, multiple choice, and this is one that you would use a lot: dog, cat, fish. Okay. This is if I want my students to pick one off of the list. Now, notice this one here where it says add other. If I select that, other, and then they would have to type in their answer here, okay? I could also use a checkbox, and the difference between the multiple choice and the checkbox is that I could select two or more, okay? I could select dog and cat, whereas multiple choice, I could only choose one of those. You'll notice also too, and this is something I like to point out to the students, very similar to test prep that we get, that there's a difference in the icon here. The checkboxes have squares, whereas the multiple choice has the dots here. I could also choose a drop down where I get a list of options. And so when the student takes it, there's a list and there's a little drop down window and they select it. All three of them do the same thing. Multiple choice and drop down do the same thing. They're allowed to choose one. Checkboxes allow them to choose more than one answer at a time. Now, if you would like to see what a question would look like, for instance, what the difference between the drop down and the multiple choice would look like, you can always go up here to this preview button. And this allows you to take a look at the student view. So like after you send it out to the students, what would it look like? And notice here, I would just pick the one that I like, okay? And you can close that whenever you're done. Now notice it's going to say like, hey, your changes have not been saved, right? Well, that's because when you're doing the preview, it's actually like letting you take the quiz or the assessment or the fill out the survey, right? I can hit leave because I'm not really worried about select or saving any of that information right now. Some of the other types of options that we have here, if this is a file upload, so this is really handy for, let's say that you want students to create something. Maybe it's a video, maybe it's, a piece of artwork or take a picture of something, but you want them to, make it an easy place to download it and help you organize it afterwards, right? This file upload allows a student to choose a file off of their drive, okay? Now, and it gives you some information about how to do that, okay? And you can also, limit what types of files that they get, okay? Now, the nice thing about this is, again, because it does kind of keep everything organized and allows you to kind of control that process so you don't get like 30 emails and you don't know if they're going to work or whatever. So here, again, I have this generic question I had earlier. I'm going to select up here only certain file types. What do you want? I just want a document, a spreadsheet, and a presentation. That means that if a student has a video, they wouldn't be able to upload it, okay? They wouldn't be able to send those things in. How many files? I can change the number of files, 1, 5, or 10, the maximum number, and I can also change the size. And that's one of the big problems that we have when like students use their cell phones to create videos. They have this like ginormous file that they can never get to, right? So this is another way of kind of helping them say, oh, hey, my video's too big. I need to do something to make that, make that easier to submit, okay? So that is a great tool. Now, again, this does replicate part of like the Google Drive where they put something in Drive and then they share it to you or they email it to you. I know that is kind of a repeat of that. But again, it's nice for the organization or nice to be able to limit and control what comes into you for that assignment. The next type of questions that we have are these kinds of scales and grids that you might use. Again, these, you know, depending on what you're trying, the information that you're trying to collect or the information that you want to try to capture, you know, these are some neat little tools that give you some different options. This linear scale, obviously you pick, you know, 1 through 10, 1 through 3, whatever, right? So how much do you love your pet? Question mark, right? And then on a scale of 1 to whatever, they pick that. Here too, I can also like limit it, like it's not my, so I'm not really attached, right? Not really attached. And then like, you know, down here, love like, love my pet to death. Right? And then so I can kind of control, you know, because sometimes, you know, we generally feel, you know, the bigger the number, the stronger the response, but sometimes you need to give that kind of direction to your students so they know exactly what you mean. Over here also we have this multiple choice grid, okay? So what is your favorite pet? Okay, and then I'm going to put dog, cat, fish, and then over here, love, like, and don't like. Okay. And what this does is, now I want to make sure that I have this over here. This allows me to say, you know, like you can answer every line or you not answer every line, right? So what I'll do then is I'll just take this preview and show it to you. And then you select for dog, do you love, like, or don't like? Cat, whichever, right? Now, notice here that I have that option selected, so they have to answer each one of these. They have to answer each one of them. I can turn that option off so they could just answer like the ones that they care about or whatever, okay? I also have this checkbox grid, which will look very similar and does the same thing. It's the same difference between the multiple choice and then the checkbox. I pick one or I can pick multiples. So now here, and not, for this question doesn't really work, but I love and like dogs. I kind of like cats, and I love and I don't like fish. I don't know how you can love and don't like, but the checkbox grid allows you to select multiple ones at a time for each option. These are, again, some interesting places that you can gather some interesting data or some feedback from your students so that you can, you know, kind of take the temperature of the room, or you can kind of gauge where your students are at, or get some feedback on an assignment or on their experiences with something. And then we've got a couple other options down here that you might find useful depending on, you know, what kind of information you're trying to collect from your students, where you can ask them the date and time. So let's say that, you know, you can ask them like, when did you finish the book? Did you finish your homework? And then I can change it to the date here, right? And they would come in here and when they would go to that question, they can click on that little box, which we're familiar with, and add in the specific time or date, date. Now notice they can select today. Today is also highlighted. I could also, you know, go back. Oh, I finished it in May, you know, and then hit submit. I can also, with the same thing, I can, in a separate question, I can ask time. Unfortunately, I can't ask time and date in the same question. But that, you know, in separate questions, when did you finish your homework, at what time, and I can capture that information from your students. So now that you've seen the different types of questions that you have, there's some things to think about as how to start creating your form. Okay, so let's say, and I'm just going to select this here. Let's say that this is my first question, and it was a short answer. Okay, down here, I can duplicate this question. When did you finish your homework? Okay. What was the easiest part, right? And I could just hit duplicate down here and duplicate. Okay. let's say that, I don't like this question. Either now while I'm creating it or later when I edit it or whatever, I can hit the trash can, gone. That's a pretty obvious one, right? This option right here, where it allows you to make a question required. So this would be if you want to make sure that a student answers every single question. Now, maybe it's like, I really have to have this piece of information if it's some sort of survey or whatever. Maybe if it's an assessment, I really want to know what you're thinking on this. I really need you to answer it. They will not be able to submit or go on to the next section if they haven't completed this one. Now, if I turn that off, that means the student can skip it. Okay, it won't be one that they absolutely have to do. Now, when the student takes is in the form when you send it out, notice here you'll see this red asterisk, and that's required, and that's in the instructions, and that's a standard that every student will get when they open this up. Down here, I turn that option off. It is not. Okay, so let's say I hit submit. Notice it makes me go back up here. This is a required question. So it makes me go back there. Before I hit submit, I have to put in an answer. Now, doesn't mean it doesn't mean that the student, does it seriously, but it does force them to go back to that. Also here, one of the other ones that you have is a response validation. Okay. And here I have some options. For instance, I can change the type. Like it can only, I want only text. And the text has to contain dog, right? So if the student doesn't do, must contain the word dog, okay? So if the answer that they type in does not have that word, it won't be taken. It will not be allowed, right? Maybe I only want it to be maximum character count 140 characters. So it's like a tweet, right? Like you can't go any farther than this number, right? So that's an option that you can do. In math, it has to be a number. You can't type something out. So there are ways there to limit the types of answers that you get. There's some other options over here that will help you create your form. This one here is the add the question. So like a minute ago, I showed you like the duplicate, like here's my question. I just want it duplicated. Okay. You can go in here and just hit add question so that you can create any type of question. Now I can go back and edit. I can hit duplicate and then change a short answer to a long answer, a short answer to any of the check grids or whatever, right? I could do that as well. I'm not limited to just the same thing. But this is if I just want to create a question. Maybe I want to import questions, okay? So I'm going to select here. And what I can do is, let's say that I've got this form that I've used previously. Maybe it's like, chapter 1, I want to reuse some of the same questions, or chapter 2. So what I can do then is I can go into that and select some of those questions to reuse, okay? This is pretty handy if you want to keep some consistency, or maybe you want to have like 3 versions of the same form, right? With just a little bit of variation. I can keep importing those questions in, any or all of them that I want. Here, I can add in a title or a descriptor. Now let's move into your favorite, your favorite toys. Okay. And so this isn't a question. There's nothing that the students have to do with this one, but this way it's kind of like putting part 1, part 2, part 3, right? And that allows the students to see, okay, we're shifting gears. Maybe it's vocab and then it's, reading comprehension. Now I'm going to skip down to this one here. This one here, this add section, which is very similar to this add headline or title and description. Okay. When I go to this section, okay, notice here I get this new block and whatever. It almost creates page 2, and I'm going to turn this form off, okay? And let me go to my preview here. So notice I get my first questions, right? Okay, here's the question. Here is it. When did you finish it? When did you finish it? Okay, now let's move on to your favorite toys. Then I hit next, and I'm turning the page. I go to the next section, right? So you could either do that headline title to kind of, denote that, hey, we're moving from one idea to the next, or I could do it in a section, and that would change the pages, right? The section is also kind of handy because it allows you to create some different paths that I can show you here in a minute. I can go in here, go down here. Maybe I want to add an image. Okay. Now here is, let's say that I want to use, I don't even know what pictures I have on here right now. I know I have a whole file full of stuff, but let's say that I want to use a picture. Maybe it's like a visual representation of something. Maybe it's an image that I want students to look at and answer questions based upon. Okay, and so I can go in there and use that and add that in. Let's just go into my pictures folder here, so you see what that looks like. And there's a lot of pictures on here. Sorry. And let's just grab this one here. And when I go to my preview, second page, sorry. There it is. And then I can have a question underneath of it. The picture above shows what, right? So I can use that as well. And then also I can drop in a YouTube video. So I want the students to watch something and then respond to it. And that is super awesome because that really gives your students a place to watch and do everything in one place, instead of like, go do this, then come back here, go over here and do this. It keeps everything in one spot. So let's take a look at some of the other options that we have in creating our form. And these are the ones up here. So you can do an add-on. So some of the different add-ons that Google has to add some functionality to it. This one here is the theme option, which I always love to use. In fact, the students know, like, oh, hey, this is real quick, or he did this at the last minute because it didn't change anything. I can, obviously, you can change the color. I want it to be this, I want to be this, whatever. And it creates a color palette for you. I can change the font, however I want it to look. This is the one I really like using, where I choose the image header. Now, so Google gives you some headers to start with, right? They give you some things that you can play with and begin with, okay? And then when I select one and I insert it, it adds it here at the top. It also adjusts the color palette to match that, right? Which is kind of cool. I can close that. I can choose a different one. I like doing this a lot because, sometimes you get to see what the differences are, so you can kind of quickly at a glance see what everybody is doing. Okay, like which people are taking which ones. It's a kind of a handy little option. You can also pull in your own photos. Okay, so I can upload, and I can, let me go here. I can drag a picture in that I have. Okay, so let's go ahead and drag a photo. And let's see, let's grab, I think, this one here. Okay. Now, when you pull it in, it's going to give you this. This is the header area, right? So this is the part of the picture that you're going to see. And I can, crop it down, Also, you notice here, this is an animated GIF. It will allow you to put an animated GIF on there. And I'm going to hit done. And there it is. Now, that's not a really good picture because I zoomed on it really hard, so it doesn't look really good. But this is really handy. Like maybe it's like the book title. Maybe it is, a piece of artwork that is part of the description. Maybe it's the class, some sort of class artwork, so you know which class people are taking, right? It just gives the page or the form a different look. It's kind of fun. It's a place that you can have some fun with. It also serves some functionality, though, if you are intentional with what you do. This here, the gear wheel, is the universal Google symbol for the settings. And there's some settings that you can set for your form. it is really important for you to make sure that you have checked this. Obviously there's a default setting dependent on your administrators, rules and how they've set things up. But it's very important to check these because some of these things can really make the difference between how functional it is or what types of purposes that you're using. So the first is collect email addresses. So if you want your students to, you want to be able to reply to them through the form, or you want to be able to use some of the auto grading functions, this collecting email is very important. Okay. If you turn this off, you won't know who submitted it unless you ask them specifically their name. And even that, Joe can Joe can answer it for Susie, right? He can, say, I'm Susie and put it in. But if you put in the email address, you have the email address of the person that logged in. Now, they can get response receipts. Now, what that means is that afterwards, whatever they answered, they would get a copy of that. Okay. And so when they got done, there would be an option for them to select and get a copy of their answers. Depending on how you're using it or what you're doing with the form, that may or may not be good. Obviously, if it's an assessment, do you want your kids to have, how they answered something and they can share it with somebody else? You might want to think about that. But if it's like, you wanted to collect some information about, from students about, their phone number, their addresses, those kinds of things, they might want to make sure that they got that back so they knew, oh, yeah, I did give that right information. I can hit this always, and what happens then is when students hit submit, an email would be sent to them with their responses. Down here, I can restrict it. Obviously, in my case, EVSC, they have to be part of that domain to do this. And that's important to take a look at. But let's say, for instance, you send this out to parents. They wouldn't have your school district's email addresses. And so they wouldn't be able to, get on and take this form. So that might be something to think about. Again, check your administrator's default. And also check your kind of, what your policies are, because sometimes, your district won't allow you to send forms out to people outside of that domain. I can limit to one response. This is pretty handy if you want to make sure a student isn't cheating. Like, let's say they go in and they take it and, they write down the answers and they go study and find the answers and then come back and retake it and they submit two. You would see both submissions. Okay. That isn't, that wouldn't be, you would see that obviously. And so, they wouldn't be able to only do it twice, but you only get one response. But that is handy because it forces them to put their best information first and to kind of control the process a little bit. Can students edit after submission? When they hit submit, there's an option that allows them to go back and change their answers. Okay. As long as they have that link and as long as you are accepting responses, they would be able to go in and respond. There are some places for that for you. There's some places not for that for you. And so you do want to kind of think about how you want the students to interact with the form. And I can also allow them to see the summary charts and text responses. And what that would mean is that when they got done, they would be able to see how are other people responding? What kinds of things are other people putting on? They wouldn't see it by name, but they would see summaries of that. And again, it depends on how you want people to interact with this. And if you want to control what people are doing with it. Under the settings, we have this presentation option. And this is kind of like the visual or, how the students will see the form. This progress bar. If I check this, the students will be able to see how far along they are. Now, if it's one page and all the questions are presented at once, okay, this may not be very necessary, and won't really show won't show the students very much. But let's say that I have multiple pages. Okay, I have several sections and several questions within each section. Then I might want to show that progress bar just to show them how far along they are. I can shuffle the question order. So again, this is kind of a way for you to change the way that the form looks, especially if it's a quiz or some sort of assessment, and you want the students, not to necessarily, make it a little more difficult. They just can't look over the person next to them and select AA because that's what they have. You can change the order. Now, you cannot change the order of the responses. And that's because of the way that it collects the information and you get to use it on the spreadsheet afterwards. But you can randomize the order of the questions. And then, and this is a default on ours, show a link to submit another response, okay? So like when they hit submit at the end, if you want to hit another response, and you would check this, and it takes you back into it. Now, remember, there's the option earlier to limit to one response, okay? So you can change that, okay? So if you turn that off, and then if you want them to be able to resubmit, click, 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 and away they'll go. I can also add in here a message at the end. Thanks for your time, okay? And then if I go here to the view, and I go to next, and then I hit submit. So here it is. Here, send me a copy of my responses. I showed you that a minute ago. If I turn that on, I would get an email with that. I'm going to hit submit. Thanks for your time. And so I can change that to anything I want. It can be a link to another reading. It can be, maybe a custom message like, here's what I want you to do next or whatever, right? And then here's the link to submit another response if I wanted you to go back in or give you the option to go back in and select a response. And then there's this option, the quizzes. And this is kind of a cool option that you can use if you are making some assessments, especially assessments that you want to use for like some quick formatives. You want to quickly gauge if the students are getting some information or not. So if I go under the quizzes option, I turn this on. Now notice the default is off. Okay, so I turn this to the on. Okay, now I get some options that I can use. So what's going to happen is, as a quiz, it's going to automatically grade this for me. Okay, so first option is turn on lock mode. Okay, now if you are using managed Chromebooks, okay, if your school is a Chromebook school, you select this. What will happen is that when the students go in and take this quiz or this assessment or test or whatever it might be, they can't navigate out of this tab. Okay, they will be locked into this screen, so they can't open up another screen and look for answers or whatever. Very handy if you want to really control access. Now, this only works on managed Chromebooks, so if you're using iPads or any kind of other laptop, you will not have that option. Okay. Down here, release the grade. What will happen is they'll see their grade. When it auto grades it, it'll say 6 out of 10. 80%, whatever it might be. I can either do it right now or I can do it manually. And what that means then is that it will grade it, and then I can go in and if I want to finesse it or change it, or maybe I want to add, there's some written responses I need to grade first. Okay. What happened then is I go in, I do that grade, and it will send that off. And then here's what you can see. The students, if they missed a question, it'll say you missed number 1, number 2, number 3. Okay. If you have this one checked, they can see the correct answer. So on number 1, they selected A, but the answer was C. Again, think about how you want to control or what information you want to control, because if Joey goes in and selects A and the answer is C, he can go, hey, Susie, answer C, right? And he can do that. That was especially true if somebody takes a test and then somebody is sandbagging, is just kind of dragging their feet so that they can get the answers from somebody else. And then the point values, again, if this is checked, they get to see this is a 1-point question. This was 3 points. Here's my score. Here's what I have. And again, after I make any of these kind of selections, then I would just hit save to make this an auto grading quiz. One more area to take a look at here, and it's the response area right here. And this is So notice here, this is the question. So this is where you create the form. This is where you create the questions and whatever you want to do. This allows you to work with the responses and the data that you've collected. So if I go over here to responses, it'll show me who's responded, right? I will see names. I would see a list of everybody who has responded. And then I would also get the question and then how many responses I got from each one. So let me go to one that I've already done before. This one has 53 responses. And then notice here's all the people that have responded. And then here, this is like super cool, quick data analysis for you. Okay, so here's the question. I got 53 responses. Here were the 3 answers. Notice 96% picked A. 2%, or I'm sorry, 4% picked B. So now here's the cool thing that you can start to do. You can look at these responses and start to see patterns. Like, okay, so here, these are pretty clear cut. Number 1, number 2, number 3, the students got. So I only got one person that got that one wrong. I only got 2 people to get that one wrong. But look at this one, number 4. Okay, now I'm starting to see like, okay, there's a lot of discrepancy here. You know, it's the majority of people picked A, but there were a lot of people that picked B and some C as well. So I had 18 here, 19 here, and 9 here. So now I start to question, okay, why did they pick these? Why were these here? Maybe if A was not the answer, maybe A was wrong. Why did so many people pick A? What was it in there that made people think that that was a good option? And again, we see, you know, those kind of split decisions here. This gives us some really good, quick data analysis that we can use. Also up here, I have this option here. This is the spreadsheet. And what this does is this will either take you to a spreadsheet that has all the information in it, or it'll create it for you, then take you there. But this will show you all that information on that spreadsheet view. And it's pulling it up here. Now, this is a little, you know, overwhelming. To see all this is a little overwhelming, but it, you know, this is all the raw data. Now you can go in and do a lot of things with this. For instance, you'll notice here under grades, I ran the Flubaroo add-on. I ran Flubaroo on here, and that graded it for me. So I didn't use it as a quiz on the Google side. I used Flubaroo afterwards. You know, it's handy. It does different things for you, but just something to be thinking about when you are choosing what you're going to do. I can also change some destinations, or I can print my responses. So some different things I can do with this that we don't necessarily need to get into right now. And then this one here, let's say that I'm done. Like I don't want any more responses. So maybe it's like I just did this the first 10 minutes of class, or you know, it's a one and done thing, or maybe it just doesn't really matter. I don't want any responses. Okay, I can turn that off, and what that means then is that when somebody went to this link to reply or to submit a response, it would say, sorry, this is no longer collecting. In this essence, it just turns off that collection. So that's how you create Google Forms. That's how you go on and create the different questions and manipulate the form in different ways. So I think the last piece to be thinking about then is how to use a Google form. You know, and that will control or you know, that will kind of, you know, make some of the choices of how you create and set it up important for you. If you are collecting information, you just want to be able to create a form that you send out to parents, so you have, you know, names and addresses and bus routes and, you know, what they're having for lunch, or maybe it's a sign up for open house or whatever, you know, different things that you want to do. You know, those things are a little more straightforward. You create those, you know, open-ended questions, you create those predetermined slots. If you're using it as an assessment tool, then, you know, you want to really kind of think about what the type of assessment is. If it's a formative, you know, those multiple choice, those checkbox questions, you know, it's going to be really handy. If they are more of open-ended, like I want the student to reply and respond and offer feedback, then think about those Likert and the grids. If it is a assessment where I'm really trying to get a summative look at the student and how they are interacting with the material and what their comprehension level is, then those short answer, long answer ones are going to be more beneficial because they allow you to give the students some space to share what their understanding is, right, and to apply the information. So you do want to kind of think about how you are going to use this. Now, two things to think about as you kind of are creating your forms. One of them is I always like to ask the student's name, and I ask it separately, first name, last name. I think that's really important. I know that there's the option to collect like the user's email address, and that works. That's beneficial. But remember, what does that email look like? Is it first name, last initial? Is it some sort of code? Is it first name dot last name? And will you be able to sort it out as easily? So I like to have, the names on there. It allows me to do some sorting and stuff. I think that's kind of important. I think also too, it's a way for you to create a path into the assessment where the students have already started engaging with it. If the first three questions are name, first name, last name, and class period, and then you go to another section, they're already committed to doing some of the work. And if they're required questions, you've already captured some of that information and it forces them to continue. So I think that's kind of, something to be thinking about in just the design. I think also too, when you think about the design, you can move questions around. For instance, you see here these little blocks. I can move these. I can change the orders of some of these questions, right? You can do this at any time, okay? You create it and you're like, oh, I forgot that one question. Add it in and then move it to where it needs to be. That's not a problem. But the one thing to think about is that when you do that on the spreadsheet, when you create the spreadsheet, if you're going to use the spreadsheet view to look at the information as a whole, once you create those questions and you create the spreadsheet version will not change order. Now, the form will, and that's not a problem, but it will continue to put them in that original order on the spreadsheet. So if that's something to be aware of, if that's something of a concern, you definitely need to be aware of and make sure that you have that formulated and set up right the first time. Other than that, the best thing to do is get in there, play with it, have some fun with this. You can ask as many or as few questions as you'd like, but get into it. And I know that once you start using this, you will see how handy this is and all the different uses that you can bring into your classroom.